I'd like to introduce Jake Swafford. He is a coordinating wildlife biologist at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever in Missouri. Jake actually grew up in our youth programs here at the Conservation Federation, and he is a lifetime member of both Quail Forever and CFM. So with that, Jake, I'd like you to go ahead and take it away, and feel free to give us a quick intro on what you'll be covering for us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Colton. And is the screen share working appropriately? Awesome. Well, thanks for the quick intro. Like Colton said, my name is Jake Swafford. I am a coordinating wildlife biologist for Quail Forever here in Missouri. I cover Northwest Missouri, focusing on monarch, butterfly, and pollinator programs. Also, I've been involved with CFM for a really long time, and so I'm excited to participate in this web series and help get you guys some more information about how you can impact pollinator habitat. I guess to start off, last week we had Anna Swearzik, who also works for QF, but in case you couldn't make it last week, bottom line, Quail Forever is the habitat organization. That's how we strive to make a difference for wildlife, be that quail or pheasants. Our mission is to conserve quail, pheasants, and other wildlife through habitat improvements, public access, education, and conservation advocacy. And in Missouri, we accomplish that through work that our local chapters and volunteers do, projects and banquets, those kind of things. Through our biologist program, I believe we have 22 staff across the state now, and terrific partnerships with all sorts of different conservation organizations across the state. So really, really lucky for the programs we have and the partners we have here in Missouri, and that we get to put them to use for wildlife habitat. A quick intro, since this is a pollinator web series, I don't want to just talk about the cost share programs to improve their habitat. I wanted to give a quick intro on pollinators themselves. And so the act of pollination is just anytime there's a process where plants are moving pollen from a male to a female part for the purpose of reproduction. And that can happen a lot of different ways. Some plants can pollinate through wind, water. They can self-pollinate, but a really common vector for that pollination activity is animals, be that birds, bees, butterflies, bats. There's all sorts of different critters that can serve that function. And oftentimes they're highly specialized individual wildlife species going with individual plant species, and them being dependent upon each other. And the reason we're talking about pollinators, other than that I think they're really neat, and there's just a lot of great information out there and really cool adaptations, whatnot, is that they're in decline. And so we've seen steep declines in bee populations all over the world. Monarch butterflies are a really good example of another species, iconic species that we're starting to notice big declines in over the last 20 years. And it's such an issue that, here in the United States, we even have a pollinator health task force, and just really, really focused on conservation efforts to try to bring these species back and make sure that their health is protected over the long term. Why does it matter? Pollinators are indicator species for an ecosystem. So when we start to see them having trouble, it's a good indication that the rest of the critters out there and the ecosystem as a whole is probably having some larger issues. We're really dependent on pollinators for our crops and agricultural production. Many of our crop species are dependent on pollination, and I believe it's 1 out of every 3 bites in our food chain is dependent upon a pollinator. So what are we going to do about it? How can we help And the answer, like I alluded to earlier, at least from Quail Forever standpoint, is habitat. We have to have the habitat out there to allow these species to reproduce and thrive. And it's an easy transition, an easy way for Quail Forever to get involved, because pollinator habitat is great, quail habitat, and pheasant habitat. It's great for deer and turkey. So it's kind of a no-brainer. We can put these diverse mixes out there full of wildflowers and do good things for a lot of different species all at once. But if you're familiar with these diverse plantings, you know they can be tough to establish. They require some specialized knowledge, and oftentimes they can be kind of expensive. And so tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about the conservation programs that we have here in Missouri that can help you if you're interested in creating some of your own pollinator habitat. And the agencies and programs involved, I kind of intentionally left the acronyms here because one reason that it's so hard to navigate these programs is that it is kind of an alphabet soup. And if you're not familiar with it, it can be really, really tricky to figure out which program is right for you and which program accomplishes what. And so this is just kind of a summary slide. We're going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. I'm by no means going to cover every detail or every situation for each one of these programs, and so I can try to tackle a few of those questions if you have them toward the end, or I'll give you some contact information for who to reach out to. But I mentioned terrific partnerships here in the state, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, is a partnership that we have and delivers a good chunk of the federal programs that you've maybe heard of or seen a lot of habitat put on the ground from, as well as the Farm Service Agency, or FSA, that delivers CRP. Missouri Department of Conservation, of course, has their programs, not just on the projects that they do on public land, but they also have LCAP, which is for private landowners. And then I'll talk briefly about one of our Quail Forever programs, just as an example for one of the non-for-profit options that are out there. So EQIP is the first program through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and that's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. You can do all sorts of different things through this program, but most importantly, it's a voluntary program that helps agricultural producers improve their properties, be that their farming operation, their pasture and livestock, or in some cases recreational ground. And we can do that improving their operation as well as environmental quality out there. It offers financial assistance, so dollars for carrying out those conservation practices, as well as the technical expertise of NRCS planners, and in some case partner positions like our Farm Bill Biologist program through Quail Forever. And those landowners get paid to implement conservation practices on their land. Some common practices through EQIP that can improve pollinator habitat would be the wildlife habitat planting, conservation cover, brush management, and field borders. These programs are or practices are designed to prep areas, maybe hay ground that's dominated by cool season grasses, and establish those diverse plantings full of wildflowers, or go in and remove brush, eastern red cedar that's maybe taken over a field and choked out some of that diversity, and early successional habitat management. We do a lot of work to go in and knock back dense stands of grass to promote those wildflowers. Prescribed burning is another great option if you're looking to improve diversity on a grassland that you already have, or in some cases knock back those invasive species that tend to outcompete some of these wildflowers that our native species really enjoy. Briefly, because this is kind of the boring part of these programs, the rules and eligibility. And so if you are a landowner that has an agricultural or forest land on your property, and have a natural resource concern such as wildlife habitat, water quality, soil erosion, then you can participate in this program. EQIP has an annual sign-up. It is competitive, and so you have to apply. And typically, the more practices you do, the more likely you are to get funded. But if you're lucky enough to be selected, it's typically a 3 to 5 year contract. And each farm bill, which tends to get passed every 4 to 6 years, has its own limit. I believe right now it's a $450,000 limit. So you can do some pretty large projects through this EQIP program. There's also different fund pools, so different pots of money that Missouri divides that up into, and that can include crop, pasture land, wildlife, or forestry. And in the last couple of years, we've even had a special pot of money just for monarch habitat improvements. The next project or program that NRCS offers is the Conservation Stewardship Program. And this program is a little bit different than EQIP in the sense that it helps improve existing conservation systems. And so they actually evaluate the conservation that you're already doing on your property. And if you meet some minimum thresholds, then you can do what they call enhancements. So more or less, they evaluate what the conservation that you're doing on your property, and they'll give you some payments to improve that management, to kind of take it to the next level and do a little bit more. There's a whole suite of different enhancements out there, but the higher your conservation levels on your property, the higher your payments are. Practices that you can do through CSP include a monarch butterfly enhancement, which has been really popular the last few years, wildlife corridors, pollinator and beneficial insect habitat, everything from wildlife friendly waters, putting bird ramps in tanks, which doesn't necessarily directly benefit pollinators, but you can see a bat there, and tree and wildlife food plantings that can provide a lot of flowering opportunities and cover opportunities for all sorts of different wildlife. The CSP is a little bit more complicated than EQIP because they do have to evaluate the conservation that you're already existing on your property. So you've got to have farm records with USDA. You have to have control of the land and be willing to not make any changes to that for the duration of the contract. You have to be the manager of that property. So a lot of absentee landowners that have a leasee on those properties for this program. And then you have to be meeting stewardship threshold. And so at least 2 resource concerns have to be in the application, which means you can't use EQIP first, or you have to be doing, I guess, good things out there already. And this is to improve that management. CSP also has an annual sign up. It is competitive as well. CSP is always a 5-year contract, and there's a possibility to re-enroll. And it mainly has those management payments. So doing things like wildlife friendly haying that allows wildlife to flush out of there. We're not going to pay as much for direct practices or individual instances. We're going to pay you to manage your property a certain way over that 5-year time span. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP, it is a unique program in that it's a partner-led cooperation with NRCS. And so each year, NRCS does a call for RCPP projects, and partners can write in and request funding. If you're selected, then these partnerships form with match dollars and federal dollars coming together to really kind of meet unique and individual needs, whether that's a particular watershed or in many cases a particular species. And that can focus on soil, water, wildlife, a lot of different natural resources. But obviously we're most interested in the wildlife ones. So through this program, NRCS and their partners can kind of create a program to meet the needs of that resource concern. The list of practices really can vary, and I'll give you a more concrete example of one that we've got here in the state right now. But as a whole, our CPPs, as I mentioned, are designed to kind of break out of the mold of the other programs that we've already got and fit a unique need for a particular species or geography. Let's see, this eligibility is more about partners, but really the suite of partners that can apply is pretty large. So state and local governments, out west, if American Indian tribes, cities, counties, and non-for-profits like Quail Forever, National Wild Turkey Federation. All of those are eligible partners for an RCPP project. And as I mentioned, they've just got to address one of the resource concerns that NRCS has identified as a priority. So a project that we have right now funded through an RCPP agreement hasn't hit the ground just yet, but the Program for Restoring and Improving Monarch Ecosystems, or the PRIME project, and that's a partnership that Quail Forever formed through the RCPP with NRCS, along with the Missouri Department of Conservation and the St. Louis Zoo, to address monarch habitat in Northwest Missouri, which is clipped by their migration route from Canada and northern US down to Mexico each year. And really what we're looking to do is maintain the habitat that's already out there or been put on the ground through existing programs like CRP. And so as those acres and programs expire and land is at risk of being converted back to agriculture from high quality habitat, this program is going to try to encourage landowners through rental payments and practices to manage and maintain that habitat on the landscape for monarch butterflies. And we're going to promote some fire along with that as one of those management tools, because we've seen a need and an impact that fire can have on the landscape, and believe that that's going to help us manage a lot of those acres and maintain them effectively. Probably the most common and well-known program that we have out there is the Conservation Reserve Program. And this program doesn't, particularly target pollinator habitat all the time, but is a program that, takes environmentally sensitive land out of agricultural production and plants it down to permanent cover to improve soil, water quality, and wildlife habitat. And it does that with an annual payment for about 10 years. CRP has a few different twists to it. We typically get a sign up every few years. Under this farm bill, I believe we've been guaranteed a sign up each year. So we're on the second one and should have another 2 or 3. And that's because we've got a lot of acres coming out of the program right now. And so FSA and USDA want to try to maintain those acres that are enrolled. And they can do that with a general sign up for general CRP. That gets announced, as I mentioned, typically every couple of years, but we'll get that each year here for the next couple. And general CRP is competitive. And so offers are made, landowners bid in their property and sign up for different practices depending on their soil type and this and that. And depending on if they get in, they'll be in a contract for 10 or 15 years. Continuous CRP is a little bit different. It's non-competitive, but targets environmentally sensitive land. And so they've got a smaller set of practices that you can use and cover types to seed those down. But the benefit is that you don't have to bid it in and compete against your neighbors or the rest of the country. If you have land that needs to be retired for at least a little while to protect the environment, then you can enroll it into the continuous program without any competition. The practices through CRP that really tend to benefit wildlife the most are the CP42 pollinator planting. Missouri has a CP38 SAFE program that is for bobwhite quail and monarch butterflies. They've also got the CP33 buffers program that allows you to plant 30 to 120 feet buffer around an active crop field. So you don't have to retire all of your land, just plant the edges where you've maybe got less productivity anyways because of the trees or some erosion happening near a stream bank. And so that's a really great practice for folks that want to continue farming. And CP2 is native grasses, which don't tend to have a lot of wildflower components on their own, but there are options there to add in pollinator plots to boost that habitat quality. And a lot of landowners do that so that they can be a little more competitive. So since they'll get some extra points there. Rules and eligibility. The land needs to have been considered planted or farmed for 4 out of the last 6 years. I think I caught an error there and I didn't update the years in this presentation, but that changes with each farm bill and each sign up a little bit. So just check with your local office on what the current years are. It also needs to be capable of being planted. So if it has too much brush or mature trees out there, they'll either map those areas out or the field wouldn't be considered eligible. And then you've got to be in compliance and not have a ton of erosion out there and managing that land responsibly. Also, you have to have owned the land for 12 months prior to the program. That way folks can't game the system, so to speak, go out and buy land that's a shoe-in for the program and then enroll it and collect that rental rate. There are some details on pollinator plots and enhancements that you can add to various practices like that warm season grass planting. Those plots typically have to be about a ½ an acre. And typically you work with a biologist to locate those in the areas where they're not going to get hit with any drift or chemical drift from nearby agriculture fields, things like that. Moving away from the federal programs a little bit, we're lucky enough to have the Missouri Department of Conservation here in the state that does a terrific job at managing our public lands, but they also have a whole private lands division. And along with that, they have the Landowner Conservation Assistance Program, which improves or helps landowners improve habitat on their private lands and achieve their objectives through enhancing that property. They've got a lot of the same practices as some of the federal programs, but LCAP tends to have a little less paperwork and hoops to jump through. If you're working with your local biologist, it's a pretty simple process, not as much weight, and you can accomplish a lot of the same things. And so if you've got invasive species that are choking out your native wildflowers and you want to get those under control, if you want to do one of these diverse plantings full of wildflowers and beneficial shrubs for monarchs or pollinators, they can do that. Prescribe fires to help you manage and control those grasslands and those invasive species. As well as other improvements for water quality and erosion and those types of things too. As I mentioned, this program is not quite as tedious with all the different rules. And so any Missouri landowner, whether you're a producer or not, can enroll. There are some cities and counties that can participate as well, or NGOs that own property and manage those can also apply. Since it is a state program, it's got limited funds, and so its pockets aren't as deep as the federal programs for sure. There's a $6,000 per landowner per year max, but it's not as competitive. It's first come, first served. So if you've talked with your local biologist and have an application in, you can typically get something funded through this program. Cost share varies a little bit. They don't pay for the whole thing, depending on whether or not you're in a conservation opportunity area or quail restoration landscape, which are fancy ways of saying a area that they've identified as a priority. You can get somewhere between 50 to, in some cases, 90% cost share there. And in a similar fashion, Quail Forever has partnered with the Missouri Department of Conservation to create the Habitat Challenge Grant. And this is a partnership between us and MDC, where MDC will match dollars put forward by our chapters 1-to-1. And so if you've got a local chapter, Quail Forever or Pheasants Forever, that raise dollars and want to put that toward habitat, MDC will double that money. And we have that to put on the ground, typically within that county or several county range, but to help improve habitat projects that the chapter and biologists identify as a priority. And that's really a unique program for Missouri. We're lucky to have it, and excited when our chapters can get involved with helping out private landowners that way. Other program sources include, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, other government agencies and state agencies, such as your local Soil and Water Conservation District, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their Partners Program. There's other programs like the MRAP program through MDC that can provide some cash rental for lands if you're willing to make those public, and you get priority for those habitat improvements as well. And so lots of different options out there if you're looking to make a difference and improve the habitat on your property. And if you're lucky enough or don't want to mess with the trouble around these federal and state conservation programs, and are able to do the work yourself, we're always happy to provide conservation technical assistance, where we can come out and give you advice, help you make sure you're doing the work right, identify the needs of your property to manage for your goals, whether that's deer, turkey, quail, pollinators, and just make sure that you're doing good things for wildlife on your property and going to hit your goals that way. If you need more information or are interested in any of these conservation programs and want to apply, there's a lot of different options. NRCS has county offices in every county in Missouri. The Missouri Department of Conservation has private lands conservationists across the state. And the PFQF team here in Missouri has biologists located all over the place as well. And so you can go to our website and find this map, or find a biologist. Even if you're not from Missouri, we've got biologists all over the county or the country that can help you out. But they'd be more than happy to give you more information, answer particulars, and help you get signed up and figure out which programs are right for you. And with that, I guess I'll take any questions. Colton can kind of take back over here for a little bit, but I'm happy to answer any questions you've got about what maybe would work best on your property or any particular programs.
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Jake, for presenting this evening. We've enjoyed having you, and